This is the Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Bruschi and continuing coverage of the case against Bryan Kohberger.
From the very beginning, this case felt too big for the courtroom that it landed in. A quadruple homicide that shook a college town to its core, a suspect with a background in criminology, and a trial that drew the eyes of the nation. Yet somehow, it all came down to a plea deal in a jurisdiction with minimal experience prosecuting murder, let alone anything of this scale. It's the kind of disconnect that leaves you wondering whether justice got delivered or if we just fumbled our way towards the most palatable resolution available. Today, we're digging into the cracks and contradictions with someone who's walked both sides of the courtroom. Former prosecutor and current defense attorney Eric Faddis. Eric knows the mechanics of how a case like this should move through the system, and more importantly, what it looks like when things start veering off course. Together, we're breaking down whether the Kohberger plea deal was truly the right call or just the safest one. We'll talk about how procedural inexperience and prosecutorial inexperience may have played a role in shaping this deal, what risks a trial might have posed for both sides, and whether a conviction was ever a sure thing. Because let's be real, all it would have taken was one rogue juror. Someone with a personal agenda or a bone to pick with the system, and Kohberger could have walked. That's not hypothetical. That's happened. And when you're dealing with a case this emotionally volatile, that risk is very real. But it's not just the legal angles we're dissecting. Eric and I also dig into the strange theater of Kohberger's courtroom behavior, his awkward, robotic attempt to seize the moment like he was auditioning for infamy. We break down the psychological game he may still be playing, and whether upcoming sentencing could turn into a BTK-style spectacle where he finally spills the details he's been hoarding like currency. And then there's the Ramsland factor. She taught him, she wants to study him, and the question is, will the system allow it? Should it? But let's start at square one. A small-town DA, a massive case, and a decision that's left a lot of people wondering if we chose closure over truth. Eric, let's start there. This prosecutor didn't have a lot of murder trial experience. Do you think that affected how all of this played out? This is a case where the prosecutor doesn't have a lot of experience in prosecuting murder cases. You know, it was a very low number. I don't remember exactly what it was, and there's certainly nothing to this level. The idea of this thing going to trial, which it was about to do, Ann Taylor's a pretty good attorney. I mean, granted, you know, she's exhausted every damn option here. I think she would have been a formidable person to fight for Bill Thompson with his, just lack of experience for where he is and being a small town DA. And then you have the jury question. This is more personal than it is legal, but were you confident this thing, if it had gone to trial, that there would have been a conviction, or was there enough reasonable doubt where there was a good chance Kohberger could have walked away from this thing, and maybe this is the best outcome for everyone?
There's always a thought that when we're talking about smaller jurisdictions, they could be overwhelmed by a case. They might not have the expertise and experience and resources to adequately do what needs to be done. You look at kind of the Barry Morphew case, another case out of Colorado. That was in a rural jurisdiction. That prosecutor messed it up so bad, the case got dismissed and she got disbarred. And so the real problems can arise under those circumstances when you have this monster case and this rural or smaller jurisdiction that might not be ready to handle it. And so does that create a greater likelihood of an acquittal? I think it does.
Let me get your reaction to what we actually saw in the courtroom the other day. Bryan Kohberger standing up, even when he didn't really need to stand up, and the judge telling him to sit down. That was a weird moment to me. Just the body language itself. So we'll put on your psychological hat for a moment. Ann Taylor stood up and did her part, addressed the judge as she needed to, and he was sitting there fidgeting. He was just waiting, is it my turn to stand up and get the participation trophy award? And then he did, very awkwardly. It was like a third grader. and stood there at attention, his hands at his side. And I know he has autism and all that. But there was, I don't know, the word I'm going for is basking. It felt like he was kind of basking in the moment. Like it was, I'm here. This is the time. I'm going to stand now. And he's like, sit your ass down. Take your oath and sit your ass down, basically. It wasn't I'm sad. I did it. It was, yep. What was your take on his personality?
That was kind of my impression too. And hey, that's just speculation. I don't know what's going on in this person's mind, but it was kind of like a hey, look at me moment. And under the most dark and gruesome circumstances you can think of. So pretty eerie. And that was kind of my impression too, is that he was like, oh, this is, my time to shine and proclaim, what I have done here that has gripped the nation and have everyone give me all that attention. That was kind of my take on it.
It was creepy. I watched some of Brian Enton's interview that evening with Catherine Ramsland. We've had her on the show before. She hasn't been able to talk about any of the Kohberger case until now. She was on the witness list. And she gave the first interview to Brian and talked about, what he was like while he was a student of hers. And according to her, she didn't really feel any red flags. And, rightfully so. Sometimes these people just slip through the cracks. He was very astute. He was very respectful. And I honestly, you look at him, I wouldn't have expected anything different. I didn't expect her to say like, oh, he was creepy and weird, maybe a little weird, but she said none of the above. But she is curious, and Brian posed the question, would you be interested in studying him? Given your unique closeness to this case and to him and having known him prior to any of this. And she said, yes, she'd be very interested in doing that. And I'm paraphrasing her answers to a certain extent. But I guess the question is that something that can be done, that should be done, is going to be allowed to be done? Obviously, there is a psychological component to this. She studied BTK, wrote a big book on him. And some of those studies have gone on to help other people in criminal justice learn about their cases, learn about their subjects, and people like this. It feels like that's what Kohberger wants. I mean, again, it's conjecture, but it feels like this is the track he's wanted to go down and live in infamy. What tools are going to be at Kohberger's disposal to live in infamy, and what tools are not going to be at his disposal to go down that road when going forward after being sentenced?
Yeah, I would totally expect there to be a psychological thorough evaluation and study of him. He's a peculiar character. He's got that autism diagnosis. He's a PhD student in criminology, and then he admitted to slaughtering 4 innocent college students. So yeah, I think we should look at that absolutely. And then one thing too that's interesting, my firm administrator Thomas Rohn, I don't know if he's watching, but he put up a really important point that I didn't think of. Yeah. Maybe Kohberger, in pursuing his PhD in criminology, was trying to study himself. Yeah. Maybe he was trying to learn more about what he's like. Why is he having these feelings? Why is he having these thoughts? Why does he have impulses to go out and harm people? I just thought that was a curious insight that might be telling in terms of the path that Kohberger chose educationally and now criminally.
I agree. I've been saying something to that effect all along, where it feels like he wanted to get on the ride, basically. He wanted to go on that ride. My theory on it all along was that there was 2 options, or maybe more, but all of them he was okay with. One, getting away with this, going and teaching about it, having others teach about him, and being the silent person off to the side going, they're talking about me, and no one's the wiser than I am. And then being the genius in the room, because he can dissect himself and say, here's how this killer did this and that, and it was so genius, and all these students are going to look at him like he's just wonderful for the first time in his life. That's my guess. But I think he was also cool with this, where worst case scenario, you get caught. And then you get to be like the folks on Mindhunter and studied, and you'll be featured in movies, and you'll go down in infamy. I think either way, he was cool. And that's where we're at right now. It feels like no matter where we go, he's still kind of winning. He's still kind of getting what he wanted, and that's what makes the whole thing so sick.
Yeah, and I can't fathom, having a Professor Kohberger for my child or something. That would just be so dark. But no, I agree with you, and we see that a lot with these high-profile killers. They have that need. There's an insecurity there. There's oftentimes they're not getting approval from folks around them in their lives, or not as much as they want, and so they seek out this stuff to have that infamy to substitute for like human connection or like normal respect and admiration that they might not be getting.
Let me ask you about this.
Not that that's an excuse at all.
Oh no, but it's just it's like it's like they're feeding on the opposite of what the system's trying to punish them with. They're like, I'll take more of that. That's delicious. I love eating dryer sheets and antifreeze. It's just like, okay, you have another Tide Pod. One more, I think, on this. The victims are going to be able to give their impact statements when they do the sentencing coming up here in late July. Rightfully so. The judges set aside roughly 2 days for that, the 23rd and possibly the 24th. Are we going to see Bryan Kohberger stand up? Let me ask you this, because there's two questions I think a lot of people wonder. Can they require him? This probably would have already needed to be done with the plea. Could there have been a requirement that he has to stand and talk and explain his shit? Or is that completely voluntary? And obviously it goes back to BTK. When he did all of that, pulled the exact same thing right before trial. I did it, guys. Ha ha. And then he stood up for 45 minutes and went through all of the deal of what he did. Could be horrible for the family to hear. Maybe it could be cathartic. I don't know the answer to that, but the fact that he had to stand there and dish it all out is what took place there. Do you think we're going to see anything like that in this case, or is it just going to be the families telling their part to a very stoic Kohberger?
Legally, Kohberger would not be required to provide his motive or information about how he did this unless it was built into the plea agreement. And it sounds like it wasn't. Mm-hmm. There could have been such a requirement sought that said, hey, we'll not put you in front of firing squad if you tell us what you did and why you did it. That's not going to happen. But does Kohberger have the right to do it? He does. He has the right to allocution, which is essentially making a statement at sentencing on one's own behalf. And so, could we hear more, especially if part of his motivation for all of this was to get infamy and to get national attention and that kind of thing? I would be surprised if he got up there and disclosed more seedy details about what he did and why he did it, and with the nation watching.
It's going to be a creepy moment when that opportunity is given. After hearing Eric break this all down, one thing becomes painfully clear. This case didn't just end with a plea deal. It ended with a lot of people feeling uneasy, unheard, and uncertain about what justice really means when the system has to pick between what's ideal and what's manageable. Bryan Kohberger didn't just plead guilty to 4 murders. He may have manipulated the legal process just enough to maintain control over his own narrative, and while sidestepping a trial that could have exposed every inch of his pathology. Eric raised powerful points about the fragility of trials in small jurisdictions. When you have a prosecutor who's never tried a case of this magnitude, there's always the risk of missteps, ones that don't just affect the outcome, but ripple across the entire justice system. The fear of losing on a technicality, the possibility of one juror throwing the whole thing off. It's not paranoia, it's precedent. And in that context, the plea deal starts to look a little less like surrender and a lot more like a calculated piece of damage control. But here's where it gets even darker. Kohberger's courtroom presence, his odd movements, his robotic posture, his almost gleeful need to stand up and be seen. It wasn't the posture of remorse, it was performance. You could feel the tension between his lack of affect and the hunger for attention. And as Eric pointed out, that eerie look at me energy is exactly what makes him so dangerous, not just in what he did, but in what he may still try to control from behind bars. We also talked about the question looming ahead. Will Kohberger speak at sentencing? Will he follow in BTK's playbook and take the opportunity to relive his crimes, twisting the knife one last time for the families left behind? He can. He has the legal right. And the fact that he might see that moment as a spotlight rather than a reckoning is nauseating, but entirely possible. And then there's Catherine Ramsland. Her willingness to study Kohberger post-conviction opens a complicated debate. Yes, we could learn from him. Yes, that knowledge might help catch another monster before it's too late, but at what cost? Do we risk giving him exactly what he wants? Immorality in the form of academic dissection and media fascination? Because make no mistake, Kohberger didn't lose, not in the way we wanted him to. He just shifted the phase 2 of his plan. One where he gets to be remembered, talked about, analyzed, studied. And if that doesn't leave you with a pit in your stomach, then you haven't been paying attention. Tell me what your thoughts are in the comment section on YouTube. I would love to hear them. If you're not there already, search Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. If you're on the podcast platforms, hit subscribe there. Greatly appreciate your support. Thanks again to Eric Faddis for helping us make sense of a case that, even in its conclusion, still feels deeply unresolved. The law may be satisfied, but the rest of us are still waiting for answers. Until next time, I'm Tony Bruschi. We will talk again real soon.
Craving non-stop true crime updates? Press subscribe now and get the latest cases, analysis, and expert commentary delivered straight to your feed. Only from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.